Surprised? Although Valerie was stunned by this answer, she really couldn't say that surprised by her husband's lack of jealousy, and, in fairness to Dane, his lack of jealousy has always been something of a blessing. Valerie was the kind of woman who attracts attention. Standing just under 5 to 10 in tall, she had what could be conservatively described as a feminine figure. Dane always joked that their first meeting was all about breasts, legs, ass, and then face, since that was the order in which she caught his attention, walking around her desk to greet him as he was ushered into her office. Now, at the age of 29, the brunette secretly felt that she looked better than she did at 19. Her breasts showed just the sexiest hint of sagging. The waist was narrow and the stomach was flat, leading to rounded hips, which spoke more of a sexy woman than a pretty girl. The legs, although slender, were muscular and athletic, completing an ensemble that would make most men feel a little out of place. And here she is, telling her husband about the young cashier who was hitting on her. And not only was Dane not jealous, but he even asked her to take him on a coffee date. In truth, Val was a little annoyed. Dane did know the cashier who was hitting on her, or at least knew who she was talking about. He could at least pretend to be a little jealous, even if he was just doing it as a compliment to her. Maybe I should mention that he also works out at my gym, she thought to herself, but that caused another bout of indignation. There was a time when Dane trained with her, but these days he did kickboxing for fun, which was another thing she just didn't understand. How could you relax from getting hit in the face? I'm serious. Go if you want. It could be fun. Valerie chose to ignore his words, quickly leaving the office. Jerk, she thought to herself, stomping into her studio. She had never even considered the possibility of cheating, but she couldn't help wondering how Dane's encouragement should actually be understood. Someone must have been bashing his thick skull with a baseball bat, knocking all the sanity out of his pea-sized brain. On Friday morning, Valerie was lifting weights in the gym. She was furious as she bench pressed, her dark eyes flashing. This morning, as she was getting ready to go to the gym, Dane announced that he would be out of town for the weekend as he was going to help some kickboxing club fighters at a national tournament. No warnings, no discussions, just, I won't be here. Bastard, she hissed, tensing, her hands shaking from fatigue. I hope you weren't talking to me, said a voice, followed by a disarming smile and blue eyes. Not for you, Valerie grumbled, lowering the barbell to her chest. That was the last thing she needed. A boy from the store. Push, Ralph said, lightly helping her do another repetition. Arching her back with effort, Valerie felt a burning sensation in her arms as she lifted the barbell up for the last time. Stretching her arms up, she felt Ralph place the barbell on the racks. Feeling that the bar was securely fastened, she let go and sat up, grabbing a towel to wipe the sweat from her face and chest. Could you help me? Asked Ralph, pushing new weights for her barbell. Of course, she said, becoming even more irritated by his impudence in interfering with her training regimen. Settling down on the bench, the 18-year-old quickly got into position and began performing warm-up reps with effortless grace. When he was finished, he removed several dumbbells from the barbell, adjusting the weight to better suit Valerie. With a smile, he motioned for her to take a seat on the bench. She reluctantly complied. Looking up as she grabbed the bar, Val couldn't help but notice a bulge not too high above her face. The young man seemed to have a lot of big muscles. Ready? Valerie nodded, sure that he had noticed her look and angry at herself for it. The little pervert probably took that look as an invitation to harass her further. Lower the bar lower, that will give you the best effect, Ralph said as she completed the first rep. On the second rep, she did it while feeling the bar touch her chest. By the sixth repetition, her hands were on fire, but there was something else. She felt an unpleasant warmth from the intimacy of the situation. With each rep, as she lowered the barbell to her chest, Ralph's hand made contact with her cleavage as he helped hold the barbell with one hand. Good job. 3 left, said Ralph, switching to a two-handed grip of the barbell. He thinks I can't do this, I thought to myself. Well, but something else stirred in her head when she lowered the bar. She could have easily stopped the rep midway, but something made her lower the bar all the way, allowing his fingers to touch the swell of her chest. Her face contorted in concentration. She was a stunning sight to her training partner as she removed the barbell and his hands from her chest. Her breasts were slick with sweat, and when she arched her back, the tight spandex did not hide the outline of her nipples, let alone the bulge of her crotch below. His muscles were also moving. 10 minutes later, they performed their final set of bench presses. As she was about to dry herself off, Val caught Ralph's eye. "What?" He seemed embarrassed. "You just look so good, wet and all. I was hoping you'd stop drying yourself all the time." Suddenly, there was electricity in the air. Val was angry, but at the same time, there was something else, a kind of animation. She wiped her face slowly, collecting her thoughts, and then lowered the towel. "The last set is yours, Ralph," she said firmly. He quickly got into position and started pumping out reps. 3, 4, 5, 6. The muscles tensed and writhed, almost hypnotizing her. He was very interesting to watch. When he finished, he sat down, breathing deeply but evenly. Turning to her, he asked, "Now, I need to do some squats. Will you join me?" "I don't think so," Val answered quickly, not even allowing herself to think about the possibilities of such a situation. "I'll spin around a little and then leave." "Okay," said Ralph, clearly disappointed, "but call if you ever need help." "I'll do so." Val smiled. "Thanks for your help this morning. I enjoyed it." He probably liked it even more, she thought to herself, wondering why she even said that, knowing that it would serve as motivation for him to continue pursuing her. The boy perked up noticeably as she turned and walked towards the stationary bikes. She felt his eyes following her the entire way. "I do this because I like attention," she answered herself, but she tried to push these thoughts aside, hide them, and not think about them further. Having chosen her itinerary, Val settled into a steady rhythm and almost immediately found herself breaking her new vow as she reflected on the last 15 minutes. In truth, this situation turned her on. The forbidden flirtation made her pulse quicken and her juices began to flow like a river. The nipples were like springy walnuts, and if she decided to squat with Ralph, it would become dangerously intimate. As images flashed through her mind, she strained herself to the limit, trying to block them. Unfortunately, this didn't work at all, as the rush of blood combined with the friction from the seat only seemed to make her problems worse. Knowing that he was there, and being all too aware of the looks he kept giving her as he walked around the gym, made everything more problematic. She wanted to jump off her bike and rush into the sauna, where she would quickly fall into nirvana. Well, it was the second best option. "What the hell am I doing?" she thought angrily to herself. It wasn't like her at all. She couldn't believe that a combination of exercise and a few innocent touches could bring her to such a state. "Damn you, Dane!" she hissed. "It's your fault!" Finally, hearing the beep, Val began to slow down, giving her body a chance to properly cool down. Watching Ralph, she knew that he had noticed everything. He seemed to hesitate aimlessly, but she could see the little gears turning in his head as he gathered his reserves. "This is it," she chuckled to herself as he approached her. "Sorry, Val. I don't mean to be pushy or anything, but..." He seemed out of breath, but then continued, "I know you're married and all, but I hope that if you don't, you might want to go somewhere with me?" Val thoughtfully studied his face, looking for something indefinable. He was right. She was married, but she also did nothing this weekend, thanks to her husband going on a brainwashing expedition. "I mean, you can come with your husband if you want," Ralph stammered, his face red. Val managed to stop herself from laughing, but couldn't suppress her smile. "God, am I making a complete ass of myself?" He grinned, trying to hide his embarrassment. Val softened. "Not hopeless. In fact, maybe not hopeless at all. What did you mean by asking me out?" Ralph seemed to have regained some composure. "How about a movie and dinner?" "Sounds tempting," Val said, sliding off the bike. "You can pick me up at 7, 353 Mountain View Drive." As she walked towards the locker room, she couldn't believe what she had just done. Dane wanted her to be adventurous, and now she was granting the bastard's wish. "No, I'm not like that," she convinced herself. "All I do is not sit at home, waiting to serve at the beck and call of His Grace, the Duke of Absence." But did this make her the Duchess of Temperance? What about her reaction to Ralph's help with the bench press, and the fact that she didn't wipe the sweat off her chest? What was that? That evening, at 6:45, Ralph was at the gate. Val was nervous about opening the door, but not nearly as nervous as Ralph seemed nervous. He seemed ready to run away at the first sign of trouble. Trouble that Ralph feared, she suspected, for fear of the reaction of his angry husband. He obviously put a lot of effort into looking his best, and he did it very well. Shyly polite, his well-muscled 6'3" was also 10 years her junior. Again, she wondered what exactly she was doing. What was her goal in this adventure? She didn't intend for anything to happen between them. She was sure of that. But why was she trying so hard to look her best? And why did she have butterflies in her stomach? Returning home early, she spent almost 2 hours getting ready. She showered and shaved her legs, but it wasn't anywhere near being on display. No man other than her husband has ever seen her naked, and that won't change. She chose thin, lacy black underwear, the kind that instantly gave Dane a hard-on. The black and white miniskirt and matching blouse showed off her figure perfectly, and the zipper on the front of the blouse provided easy access to her breasts, something she hadn't really thought about. High-heeled sandals left the legs bare and showed them off at their best. She looked fantastic, and she knew it. She felt another pang of foreboding, but now it was too late to back out, even if she wanted to, for any reason. She decided that she would enjoy the walk, and he would enjoy the thrill of finally getting his date. At the end of the night, she will easily send him away, but hopefully he will understand everything before then. "I'll grab my things and then we can hit the road." Ralph seemed to feel much more at ease as they climbed into his little Toyota and set off. By the time they reached the shopping center near her home, they were chatting like old friends. He told her that he had bought movie tickets. He didn't know what her taste was, so he hoped she would approve of his choice. She also caught the sneaking glances he gave her and enjoyed every moment of his admiration, although she had no intention of showing it. Once inside, Ralph suggested they get something to drink before the session, so they ended up ordering milkshakes from one of the ice cream parlors. Val also noticed how much attention they were getting. At first, she put it down to the age difference, but then came to believe that the attention was not judgmental, but due to the fact that they were a striking couple. By the time they entered the theater, she knew that he didn't currently have a girlfriend, what his career intentions were, and all those other things that were usually shared on a first date. As they settled into their seats, she wondered where such conversations with Dane had gone. Once upon a time, she and Dane shared their dreams too. Now they were constantly busy trying to survive until the next month. It was a sad condemnation of modern life. As the lights dimmed and the commercials began, Ralph leaned over to her from time to time to whisper some inconsequential phrase, something she hoped he would stop doing once the movie started, as it always irritated her. Fortunately, he did just that. A few minutes into the movie, she noticed that he was nervous. She also realized that she was paying more attention to his anxiety than to the screen. She almost burst out laughing when she realized what the problem was, a problem she had last encountered at the age of 16. He was trying to figure out how to take her hand without losing a few teeth. Val actually felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was young, and she was essentially using him for her own amusement, either to get back at Dane or to bolster her flagging ego, whichever option she preferred. Dane had always told her that being a hunter was not as easy as women thought, and as she watched Ralph go out of his way, she couldn't help but feel sorry for the young man. But no matter how much she pitied him, it was a bed he had made, and he had to lie in it. She had no intention of taking him any further. He wanted to take a chance and date a married woman, so he has to deal with the consequences. Any further help from her will only create an uncomfortable situation later. Leaving him alone with his plight, Val tried to focus on the movie, but she couldn't. Ralph made a big deal out of it, It took him a full 45 minutes to finally get hand-to-hand contact. Val also found herself in a difficult position. On the one hand, she wanted to get out of this situation immediately. It was dangerous. On the other hand, she had to admit that she was flattered by the attention, and more than a little angry at Dane. He was the one who invited her to continue this adventure. It was he who wanted to blame it on some boxing tournament, instead of being here and doing homework. Ralph gently took her hand. The moment of truth. Val left her hand where it was. No harm, no foul. That was all that could happen. She would see to it. Gradually, the beating of her heart subsided, and she returned her attention to the screen, all too aware of the power of the big young hands, which is now woven into her hand. These fingers were long and thick. As the credits rolled and the lights came up, the usual stampede began on the way to the doors. Val and Ralph waited patiently for their turn to join the stream heading for the exit. Stepping into the human river, Ralph stood in front of her, again taking her hand so that they would not be separated. Politely but firmly, he moved through the crowd, parting it like an icebreaker on its way to an Arctic base. Val had to admit that she loved being taken care of like that. It wasn't that Dane didn't care about her. It was more a matter of respecting independence and something lost in the marriage. It had been a while since she'd been the center of this kind of attention. Not that it was Dane's fault. It was just the way things seemed to work out when you'd been married for a while. Right now, Ralph was making her feel special. He made her feel vulnerable, small, and all those other things that gave her a warm feeling she hadn't felt in a while. And she enjoyed it. In addition, nothing reprehensible had happened so far and would not happen later. She was in control of the situation, and if he started to frolic, she would immediately deal with him. On the street, Ralph did not let go of her hand. Instead, he led her in the direction of a restaurant where he had apparently made a reservation. Val smiled slightly at his newfound confidence. She doubted he was making any assumptions. He didn't seem like that. It was probably more of a sense of achievement and chivalry. Besides, it didn't hurt that she could handle this shy, 18-year-old guy. If he was so inspired just holding her hand, he could have been destroyed just as easily. Besides, she was enjoying the adventure too. Did she really admit it? With a mental shrug, she put it aside. The fact is that she liked to walk through this crowd, holding the hand of this young stallion, at the risk of seeing someone she knew. It was Friday night, and since the complex was so close to home, there might be people there who would know she was hanging around with a guy. Maybe this was the excitement Dane wanted her to feel. She had forgotten what it felt like to be excited to be in someone's company, and she vowed that at the end of the evening she would thank Ralph for it and bring it back into her marriage. Settling into a corner booth at the cute little restaurant she'd only visited once, Val decided she wasn't mad at Dane anymore. In all likelihood, she should have apologized to him. To be fair, she should take most of the blame for the deterioration of their relationship. She was boring, not him. He was at least trying to stimulate their marriage, that's why she was here. But she'd be damned if she was going to admit it to him. The best he could get from her was a ceasefire. Satisfied with this decision, she sat back to enjoy the rest of the evening. Ralph was a nice guy. She hoped he wouldn't take it too personally that things had gone this far. An hour later, Val had to admit that she was enjoying herself, more than she had expected. Ralph was a good conversationalist and had a peculiar sense of humor. Sitting at right angles to each other at such a small table, they were close enough to each other to discuss anything without fear of being eavesdropped. This closeness also made accidental touching inevitable, so it had to be treated as such. The food was amazing. They started with wine, looked over the menu, and then ordered appetizers. Unlike most restaurant meals, the pace of the evening was leisurely. They didn't even consider the options for their main course until the leftover appetizers were cleared away, and the same for dessert. By the time the waitress cleared away the empty plates for dessert, Val was feeling a distinct buzz, thanks to the glass of wine that had somehow remained full all evening. She was an occasional drinker at best, and right now she was slightly over her usual 2-drink maximum. Prudence would advise refraining from such excesses on the first date, especially in the company of a young man who wanted to get into her pants. She liked Ralph's careful advances, the touch of his leg against hers under the table, and the occasional touches during conversation. If she weren't married, she would probably be more than interested, despite his age and subsequent lack of experience, which would be against him. If she thought he was dangerous, she wouldn't have done it, but he was really nice and he was the perfect gentleman throughout the evening. She made it clear that she was happily married and had no intention of cheating on her husband. It was just an outing with a friend, and he was very nice about it. So Val decided to flirt a little by letting him peek at her cleavage as she leaned over forward to say something, or allowing the touch to linger a moment longer than necessary. As for Ralph, he did not seem to feel intoxicated at all, except that all signs of his nervousness had disappeared. He was smart, funny, and very charming. He also liked word games and hints, and they did this all evening. "She seems very interested in you," Val remarked when waitress, having put down their liqueurs, disappeared to the back to prepare the bill. The waitress had doe-like eyes. "This won't help her at all," Ralph smiled. "She has no chance, and she knows it. She can never compare to you." Smile, compliment, smile, gratitude. When the bill arrived, Val pulled it towards her. "No, you don't understand," Ralph said, his hand covering hers. "This is my treat. I really liked your company, and it was I who asked you to meet, if you remember?" Val couldn't help but laugh at that. "I remember, but you were very convincing. However, I don't mean to offend you, but my budget can handle this better than yours, so let me do my part." "You're a sweet lady," he smiled, "but my young ego could never handle it. I'll tell you what, you can make us some coffee and we'll be done with this." "You win," she admitted, enjoying the slight mutual banter. After paying the bill, they headed to the door. This time, Val didn't even think about refusing Ralph's proposed hand. At least it helped hide the slight hesitation in her gait. It was much quieter outside. Walking slowly past the closed shops of the shopping center, they admired the display cases, stopping from time to time to look at something. Val wasn't sure at what point Ralph hugged her, but when they entered the parking lot, she had her arm around his waist, and he had his arm around her shoulders. Walking up to the car, he opened the door for her. "Thank you, Val. It really was a great evening, even if you only agreed to this to get rid of me." "It's not true," Val replied playfully, turning to face him. "At least not completely. I enjoyed it too." Suddenly, standing facing each other in the twilight, in the air felt electricity. Looking into his eyes, Val felt a slight shiver run down her spine as she suddenly realized the inevitability. She should never have let it come to this, but Ralph had already leaned forward and lightly brushed his lips against hers. "Thanks anyway," he smiled, leading her into the car in stunned silence. The trip home was uneventful and calm. Val's thoughts were racing. There she got into trouble and was let off the hook because he was a gentleman. How did she feel about this? Part of her was furious, she realized with horror. Part of her wanted Ralph to do something more, needed reassurance that she was still wanted. "Nonsense," said another quiet voice. But she couldn't deny the excitement she felt throughout the evening, all day long as she looked forward to the evening. She'll have something to think about when Ralph drops her off at home. Once she got to her house, Valerie used the remote control to open the gate, and Ralph drove up to the front door. Turning off the engine, he jumped out and opened her door. Walking towards the door, Val was thinking about how she was going to spend her goodbyes when Ralph commented on how much he needed a cup of coffee. "I probably drank a little more wine than usual," he laughed. "But that's your fault. You were such delightful company." Val slowed down. It would have been impolite to say no, and she seemed to offer him a cup of coffee in a restaurant. Or did he think she had agreed to a cup? It didn't really matter. She couldn't extricate herself gracefully at this point, and he didn't deserve to fight back just because she couldn't set and enforce boundaries. "Well, then I better make some decent coffee, don't you think?" she answered. Ralph followed Valerie into the kitchen, taking a seat in the breakfast nook while she made coffee. She rarely drank instant coffee, preferring to grind the beans just before putting the coffee in the coffee maker. As she moved around the kitchen, she was well aware that Ralph's eyes were watching her every move. They had barely exchanged a word since they entered the house, and she felt as the tension rises again. Val felt better than she had in a long time. Standing on her tiptoes to reach for something, she felt her calf muscles tighten and positioned herself so that he could enjoy the spectacle. Turning to profile, she knew he couldn't help but notice the fullness of her breasts and the firmness of her ass. What amazed her was that she wanted to show herself off like this. She was enjoying his attention. "What the hell are you trying to do?" a quiet voice warned, but she had long ago stopped listening to quiet voices. Right now, she was completely enjoying the moment. Having finished making the coffee, she waited until the coffee maker began to gurgle. Looking into the darkness outside the window, she caught some movement in the reflection of the glass. It was Ralph rising from his chair. Val's heart began to beat wildly. She knew exactly what was happening, and knew that this was what she had wanted all day. From the moment they started bench pressing this morning, right up until the moment she saw him move closer to her. But now that this moment had come, she was terrified. She froze, watching his figure approach her from behind. The touch of his hands on her forearms sent electricity through her, but she didn't turn and wave him away. He began to gently stroke her arms, pulling her closer to his own warmth. "If you don't want this, tell me now," he whispered, burying his nose in her neck. "We shouldn't do this," she said quietly, arching her back slightly. "That's not what I asked you," Ralph replied, hugging her. Val didn't answer. He held her like that for a while before he started kissing her neck again. He slowly pulled her head back, exposing her neck and jawline, all the while placing light kisses closer to her mouth. First kiss snorted across her lips like a butterfly and lit a fire that she knew ever since he took her hand in the movie theater would get out of control. Hearing her moan was the last signal for him. Ralph gently pressed her head to his chest and kissed her deeply. Valerie felt how his hard chest pressed against her back, his hot tongue burned her mouth, and his hands began to explore her body. As his hands slid down her arms to her hips, she felt that Ralph was obviously excited too. As his hands explored her stomach, she arched her back even more, pressing her buttocks tightly against him. In response, he slowly raised his hands up, and for the first time she felt those strong young hands cup her breasts. Now he was on a roll. He paused for the briefest moment, and then found the zipper on the front of her blouse and pulled it down, very slowly and very deliberately. She panicked for a brief moment, knowing that no man other than Dane had ever undressed her, but Ralph's hands were on her shoulders again, silencing her as his mouth devoured her neck. Relaxing her hands, she felt him take off her blouse, and then his hands slid down to cup her breasts, taking her bra with him. Looking at her reflection in the window, she saw her breasts in the hands of an excited young man, and they caught fire. He drew another sigh from her as his hands slid down her short skirt. Instinctively, she reached down to stop him, but he only took her wrists in one hand and pulled them to the side. Still holding her wrists, he pulled her hands up behind her head. Holding her in this position, he again attacked her mouth, and Valerie took the fight upon herself. A tongue duel ensued, and she invaded his mouth. When he let go of her hands, she pressed his face even tighter to hers, moaning into his mouth. She melted under Ralph's fingers. She placed her other hand behind her back, trying to contain or free the monster that was nesting in her hand. Suddenly, Ralph's hands were on her shoulders again, turning her to face him. He pulled her towards him in a fierce kiss, wrapping his arms around her neck. She was already standing on tiptoes, but when his hands grabbed her buttocks and pulled her closer, she rose even more. She wondered for a moment what she must look like, naked, with this huge young man towering over her. And then his lips pressed against her chest. All thoughts disappeared, and time stood still. She barely noticed how he picked her up and carried her into the living room. Val had never felt so good in a situation that was out of control. Her racing heart calmed down, and Valerie smiled at him gratefully. Apparently satisfied with his performance, he stood up, looking with hungry eyes at the obscenely prostrate body. "Don't move," he commanded, now looking completely different from the shy boy. She knew that he had played a great prank on her, and she happily agreed to it. Now it was too late to change his mind, and he truly deserved a fair reward for his work. Looks like he already had something on his mind. Taking off his shirt, he took his time, showing himself in all his glory. He had the right to be proud of his physique, and his enormous size made her feel small and vulnerable, a feeling she enjoyed. When he saw her hips begin to sway, he got the hint. She could see in his eyes that he knew exactly what she wanted now. She wanted him, plain and simple. And Ralph gave her what she wanted. Val felt slutty and completely alive. It seemed a long time passed before her shaking legs seemed in any way capable of supporting her. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Val couldn't argue. "Ideal seduction?" she asked, looking into his eyes. "Yes," he answered simply, "and I will never forget it and will always respect it." With all her being, she understood that this was only the first step in a journey towards inexplicable, uncertain pleasure, and this path irrevocably and hopelessly sucked her in like a whirlpool. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.